Securing the American dream for the next generation of STEM and workforce talent. This is the Tech Ed Podcast. I am your host, Matt Kirkner. Well, what title can you not connect to this week's guest on the Tech Ed Podcast? He is a former member of the Wisconsin State Assembly, former member of the Wisconsin State Senate. He's a veteran of the Iraq War, a lieutenant colonel today in the U.S. Army Reserves. He's a chief financial officer. He is a certified public accountant, and he is now the president of the Metropolitan Milwaukee Association of Commerce. Welcome to the studio in person, my friend Dale Kooyenga. Dale, thanks for being with us.
Thank you. Every time I meet you, I'm more impressed. And today was another impression step up with the studio and the team you got here. Very impressive.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and I can't take much credit. I appreciate it. But we have, as you know, an amazing producer in the form of Melissa Martin. We have an incredible audio engineer named Grace Castor and an amazing team around us. And so they just continue to do great things, continue to produce really, really good content, all in the name of securing the American dream for the next generation of STEM and workforce talent. So it's all about the mission, as is everything we do. I know you have exactly that same thought process at the Metropolitan Milwaukee Association of Commerce. I think it's been, about 8-9 months since you stepped in as president?
Yeah, I was president.
Yeah. How's the ride been so far? Tell us a little bit.
It's remarkable.
Yeah.
When I left the legislature, I really struggled with, am I going to find as much meaningfulness in the next job I have that I've had in that job?
Right.
And the answer is absolutely. It's
awesome.
been great to see what we've been doing and having an impact in the community.
Because you were in the legislature for 10 years?
12 years.
Well, 12 years. It's got to be just tremendously fulfilling in an elected office like that, to feel like you're doing the good work of the state of Wisconsin, and now here you are at the MMAC. What's been keeping you busy?
Well, MMAC, we do a lot of different things, and that's what's been so great about the job is in a lot of communities, economic development is a separate organization. Economic development is part of what we do.
Mm-hmm.
So we have M7, which is part of MMAC. So
right.
The economic development efforts have shown a lot of momentum, and we could talk about that.
For sure.
I really sense the momentum is because this is a place of the country where we traditionally have been very good at manufacturing and the hardware.
Yep.
And there's a convergence going on between the hardware and the software.
Absolutely.
And Milwaukee, with our advanced manufacturing, with our automation, with our robotics, now with our AI presence, with Microsoft's big investment here, a lot of momentum. We do a lot of public policy. We're always keeping our elbows out, making sure that the public policy is friendly to business and the community in general. That takes many forms as far as keeping taxes low, generally more free market types of things we like to see. And then also the big thing is education.
Right.
When you look at school choice, it's commonly called, or the voucher system, that really started in Milwaukee under my predecessor, Tim Sheehy and Howard Fuller in 1991.
Yep.
That's where it started. And you can see the momentum we built over the country since then. So we're still very, very much on those issues of having good education systems across all different forms of education for people to climb that, have social mobility.
I was actually working in the county exec's office at that time in 1991, and certainly remember Howard Fuller and his leadership, and Tim as well, your predecessor, who's also a former guest on the Tech Ed Podcast. So I couldn't agree with you more. The whole idea of innovation in education, and I just think we're on the cusp of, seeing just an acceleration in so many different ways that we educate folks. I know we're going to get into that as we continue our conversation here. You did mention the huge investment that Microsoft is making, and I should mention for our audience that may not know, the M7 is basically the 7-county regional economic development engine. Is that fair to say, here in Southeast Wisconsin?
That's correct. It's 7 counties in Southeast Wisconsin,
and so that's closely tied to the MMAC. So of course, this huge investment that's taking place in is it Kenosha County or Racine County? Pleasant Prairie, Kenosha. Is it Racine County?
Yeah.
And $3.3 billion, I believe. In fact, the guest that was with us immediately preceding you was the vice president of strategy for Microsoft, Mary Snap. So she.
Oh wow!
Yeah. So she was on last week.
In here.
Yeah. We talk about a lot of cool stuff, and we as soon as people hear about the mission and hear about getting young people excited about cool careers, of advancing technology, supporting educators, especially technical educators in STEM, nobody can say no. And so we do have a pretty good value prop that way. But Mary was just phenomenal. actually was connected to her through a guy named Greg Tavine. Greg is the head of Emerging Prairie, which is a huge entrepreneurial organization in the state of North Dakota. Was connected to Greg by Doug Burgum, who's the governor of North Dakota, as a matter of fact. And so all of these different kind of lines connecting. But let's talk a little bit about this Microsoft investment. I mean, it really is transformative, right, for Southeast Wisconsin. What can you tell us about that?
The best way to explain this to folks that aren't intimately familiar with what's going on is, when you talk about the artificial intelligence world, there's going to be tons of room for startups, and they're going to be out there. But when you talk about the hardware and the main service providers, I would argue there's probably only 4 or 5 companies that have the, not billions, but tens of billions of dollars that it takes to build that infrastructure.
Right.
For these advanced computing calculations, which when you look at the amount of it takes to do that, there's only a couple of companies. And I would argue that Microsoft is probably the lead on AI. Mm-hmm. So think of it this way. Think of the entire world only served by 5 airlines, because that's how many companies are probably really stepping up in the billions of dollars and the talent that you need for that, the money and the talent. Imagine there's 5 airlines in the entire world, and one company was the dominant airline. I would argue that's Microsoft. And that dominant airline said, we want to make our global hub Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
Isn't that amazing?
That's exactly what Microsoft is doing. Is Microsoft is saying, we are making a big investment. They've announced what they've announced so far, but I sense that this is a longer term commitment of Microsoft of having the largest AI computing power in the world right here in our region.
Well, so you think about being in the right place at the right time, and obviously all the things that you've done over the course of your career leading to this position you're in. But did you ever dream that you would be here having conversations with people like Brad Smith of Microsoft about locating a huge, data center right in your backyard and being that instrumental in that type of an investment?
Well, it's probably a whole different podcast of places in my life I never thought I would be.
Right.
From everything from basketball courts in college to the sand in Baghdad in 2008 to the state capitol in Wisconsin as a guy who grew up in Chicago to rooms with Brad Smith and other CEOs talking about the next generation of information technology and the key role this is going to play. So, that's a whole nother rabbit hole that probably goes with some beers as far as rooms I never thought. I'm like a quantum leap guy, I guess, is finding myself in positions like, where am I now? What am I doing? And that's, I think, what's really interesting in the space you're in is technology is we're doing economic development plans right now and looking at strategy. And one of the things that I think is very interesting, and I think our perspective on this is helpful, is you see these economic development plans or strategies, and they have these different sectors of manufacturing and healthcare and hospitality and then information technology. Right. And I think that's wrong. Information technology can no longer be viewed as a standalone sector. Mm-hmm. It's the water that the fish swim in. Right. And so if you're in healthcare, you're information technology. If you're in manufacturing, information technology, and you could go down the list. And so if you're a CEO of a large company, it's definitely if you're a CEO of a public company, and you think you're not an information technology CEO, you're wrong. And you're probably a sell that stock. Yeah. And so it's really interesting to see in our community this all coming together.
What we saw in manufacturing was this convergence that you're talking about. We called it the OT-IT convergence, right? Yes. So you've got information technology on one side, operations technology on the other, and the line between those, got closer and closer together, and now it's almost indiscernible. And you can't, with the role of AI and data and machine learning and all of the incredible things that we can do in terms of predictive analytics in manufacturing, just in that sector alone, to be able to drive improvement that, to your point, is happening across every single aspect of the economy. You think about, Dale, the what we call the edge to cloud continuum. So on the edge, you've got sensors and smart devices that are gathering data in real time, sending that all the way up, in manufacturing, from a device to a programmable logic controller, then onto a computer network, and then up to the cloud where all of these computations are taking place and where we're doing all these predictive analytics. That continuum happens in every single sector in the economy, and it doesn't matter if it's a nonprofit organization, if it's a government organization, if it's a manufacturer, hospitality, healthcare. I mean, every single aspect of the economy is being impacted and affected by that development and by that innovation. And so to think now that we've got Microsoft right here in our backyard building a huge hub for data and AI. Why Wisconsin? I mean, why would they look at a state like Wisconsin, a location like Southeast Wisconsin, and say, this is where we want to do that?
Yeah, let me give you the bullet points on the front cover of the pitch, and then we could go into kind of more detail as far as why it was so attractive. The fact is Wisconsin, relative to the rest of the world, has about as low a number of natural disaster risk as you could have. We don't have hurricanes, we don't have cyclones, we don't have earthquakes, we don't have forest fires. We have very, very, very small number of tornadoes. And so from a natural disaster risk, I mean, when your infrastructure is going to depend on, you cannot have those risks out there. You got to minimize those risks.
Of course.
I think it's something we take for granted in our country, and we shouldn't, especially as the world is getting more conflict ridden. So let's just kind of walk around the world real quickly. I mean, Asia, you have, China, you have North Korea, you have a lot of animosity there and a kind of a new Cold War mentality with what's going on there. A lot of political uncertainty related to the national security issues. You look at Africa. I mean, Africa continues to have a series of military coups, a lot of unstable governments, not a place you probably want to put this type of investment. South America, you just saw the Venezuelan election on Monday. Once again, a lot of political drama, a lot of coups, massive inflation. I mean, for crying out loud, who would have thought in our lifetime that we would see another large-scale war in Europe? In Europe.
Yep, exactly.
I mean, we thought that this was a continent at peace, the capitulation for World War II, and here we are with Europe uncertainty. So when you go around the world, you look at places to invest. Does America have its problems? Absolutely, always have, always will. That's the nature of the world we live in. But relative to the rest of the world, from a national security standpoint, we are safe. And by the way, Wisconsin is in the center of the safest country in the world. So that's not a risk. Kind of more granular is there was a company, Foxconn, which very, very large producer, subcontractor for the megas of Apple and Microsoft and other companies. And they really were going to make a big, big investment in Wisconsin. Now, on a standalone basis, they did make an investment in Wisconsin. It led to 1,000 jobs. It was good. Not what was expected.
26,000, I think, was that the number, something like that?
I don't know the number off the top of my head, but it was not. It was not what was expected. But the state of Wisconsin put the infrastructure in there in anticipation that was going to be a mega, mega, mega project. And what happened is when Microsoft looked at places that were shovel ready for this type of infrastructure, it was ready. And so we would not have won this if it was not for that investment. So it all turned out.
Absolutely.
And fortunately, there's Democrats and Republicans that united on Foxconn, and now Democrats and Republicans that united on the Microsoft. What need to be done politically, and so it's happening.
Absolutely. It's happening. It's happening in a huge way. It's happening in an exciting way. You mentioned a number of things that I think were really interesting right there. I remember a conversation with a prolific Milwaukee real estate investor, Joel Lee. I don't know if you've crossed paths with Joel at all. Several years ago, probably 15 years ago. And this was in the manufacturing world. We saw what was happening in China and really the rise of Chinese manufacturing going back to the kind of early zeros and the worry in U.S. manufacturing. And Joel said this to me, and it just always kind of stuck with me. He said, we underestimate in this country the value of stable government and stable financial markets.
We do. We just kind of bake it in. We just assume it.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's when, regardless of political affiliation now, looking at all the vitriol happening at the national scale, it's like, guys, there's these great opportunities for us to, you talk about how Republicans and Democrats came together here in the state of Wisconsin, saw this investment on the part of Microsoft as good. Didn't really matter who got the credit, but it really is kind of a microcosm of how if we focus on economic development, if we focus on what's right for a community, we can do big things. Is that a fair assessment?
It's actually a fair assessment. It's funny because we were geeking about our accounting backgrounds, and when we were going to do, if you were going to do an assessment for an investor at that level, you do all your financial stuff, the risk. And I don't think 10 years ago you would have put a lot of stock in a international political risk or international security risk. And that is now a big, big part of the calculation. And so, and we fare well on that. So there's still things we need to improve upon in Wisconsin to be a public policy utopia. But the fact is, manufacturing is tax-free in Wisconsin because the manufacturer has credit. Agriculture is tax-free in Wisconsin. We're talking about, all things are information technology. I would also argue the food and beverage industry is really manufacturing now. If you at that big level, it's big. It's similar processes, similar technology, and we are a food and beverage hub. We're a manufacturing hub, and now technology is more competitive and more efficient. So it's happening.
So that's really, really fascinating. Certainly, this whole advancement on the side of AI and big data and so on here in Southeast Wisconsin, driving things in education as well. I think I crossed paths with you at a meeting at the Connected Systems Institute at the University of Wisconsin, Milwaukee not too long ago. Certainly some great things are going on at Gateway Technical College, where I'm on the foundation board, and Microsoft making some pretty significant investments there. If I'm an educator in Southeast Wisconsin, and let's kind of talk about every level, maybe starting with kind of technical colleges, universities, and then would love your insights on the K-12 space as well. How should I be thinking about, the future of this intersection between technology and education, and what is that going to mean for both, for our workforce eventually here in Southeast Wisconsin, but for how we educate that next generation of the workforce?
Yeah, I think for too long, the stovepipes between different studies in information technology, or the stovepipes between K through 12 and our tech college system or university, it has been elbows out, and it's been, hey, this is my lane, that's your lane.
Right.
The real opportunity here is, and it's really gained momentum over the last 15 years, but it's to break down silos and bring the tech colleges into the high schools, and the high schools and the tech colleges.
Yep.
And then there's an element in here where I think the liberal arts has things to add in technology. I mean, that's what makes us, the art, the science, the ingenuity, the entrepreneurship makes us purely, American.
Yep.
Versus the robotic nature of do what I say, heavy on people manufacturing in China, right? So, and I'm sure we'll talk about like what MMAC is doing in bringing tech to high schools to show what right looks like. But I know, our kids attend Elmbrook schools, and I know Brookfield East has the launch program and the automation program.
Yep, Bob Hall heading that up.
Yeah, he's doing great work there. And I know New Berlin's doing, all these school districts are doing cool things. And the robotics programs, whether the robotics wars. So it's happening. But I think the breadth, the width, and the depth of it need to happen faster and to a greater extent.
It is interesting. We talk about, your use of the word stovepipes and thinking about how so many of those elements of education were separated even 10 years ago when I came over from manufacturing into the education, or at least quasi-education world. We would go to technical colleges and talk about maybe taking the robotics programs to the high school, and the reaction was always, wait a minute, we've got, we teach robotics here at the technical college. If you're teaching it at the high school, what's going to happen to my job? And it's like, well, wait a minute, our thesis was if you start teaching it at the high school, then you're going to get kids and students excited about these career pathways, excited about these technologies, and they're going to want to pursue those technologies when they get to the technical college or when they get to the four-year university or what have you. And that's exactly what we saw, is that we get them excited at that level, and then it actually increases interest.
I remember when I was in the legislature, that was one of the concerns, and particularly it was, well, if the student's only at a high school half the day, then they only get half the revenue for that student.
Right.
And then tech college. So what we did is we just said, hey, we'll pay everyone full.
Yep.
We'll pay you both. We'll double pay because it's that important. And then it was trying to get through these barriers that create perverse incentives for folks to go back and forth. The fact is this equipment's very, very expensive.
It is.
It's a very complex, complicated economy. This isn't like back in the day. I know there's some lamenting about, when we were in high school, there was the wood shop and you'd have it all there and you'd learn that. And I loved it. It was great. But I think the complexity of our economy, the dollar cost of this equipment, it is not practical to have a buffet of equipment that you may be working on in the private sector in every single high school.
Correct.
Which why it makes tremendous sense to have this all not at individual high schools, but at like a tech college level, and then share that among that geographical area. The other huge component of that was businesses themselves.
Right.
Opening up their floor, and then that training happening at the business. Because once again, it's a complex, sophisticated economy. Even a tech college cannot serve all the needs of every manufacturing company in their footprint. At the end of the day, a lot of these businesses say, just give me the three things. We always say this in the military: right time, right place, right uniform, right? So give me someone with the right time, right place, right uniform. We will train them there. And that's another, the businesses should be seen, and I know they see it that way.
Right.
I don't know if the education community sees them this way, but they should. And that is those shop floors, those offices are an extension of the educational setting as well.
Yep. Yeah, there's so many ways of doing that, and obviously we're fascinated by all the different creative ways that people are finding to bring the technologies that we have been teaching in the technical colleges into the high school. And then your comment about the cost of these programs. I did a little side project. This goes back probably 6 or 7 years for Ron Wanek, who's the founder and chairman of Ashley Furniture Industries. He had us go through and really look at what does it cost to teach something like advanced manufacturing on a per square foot basis in a university, for example, as opposed to teaching, liberal arts like philosophy or theology or what have you. And it was just a fascinating result in terms of the exponential additional cost it takes to teach advanced manufacturing. And so finding ways to leverage those investments and to bring students into the technical college to learn the things and get the hands-on skills, and then maybe go back and do some things virtually in their high schools, start slow and build up over time, focus on stackable credentials. And I know you're a big advocate for that as well. All the things that you're saying are so well aligned with the things that we're hearing. And I think that's part of the reason that we're so excited to hear about some of the things you're doing at the high school level. And you mentioned that in your answer just a moment ago about, Milwaukee Academy of Science and things that you're doing at AUG Prep and within the Milwaukee Public Schools. So talk a little bit about that. Why is that so important? And if you can, just a quick overview of what's going on there, and then why that's so near and dear to the MMAC.
So MMAC, what we're doing, and it's at the Generosity Bucerius Foundation that gave us a grant, and the purpose of that grant was to bring technical education into area high schools. And so, we're business people, so we know the toughest thing to do in business is scaling. And so we're doing this in a very scalable fashion, and we want to find a model that can be replicated or built out. But we're going into 4 high schools. There's 2 traditional public schools through Milwaukee Public Schools, and that's Bradley Tech and Barack Obama High School. Yep. And then there's a AUG Prep, which is a very special school, changing lives on the south side of Milwaukee, a Christian school. Right. Largely supported by the Husko Ramirez family. Right. That's doing that. Now they're building a new campus down the street here where Cardinal Stritch used to be. Awesome. Yeah. It's going to be awesome. And then the 4th school is Milwaukee Academy of Science, which I could just Angels on Earth, Anthony McHenry over there, the principal, changing lives, a charter school in a neighborhood just northwest of Marquette University, and they're going to be the fourth site, no particular order. Right. And so we're going in there. We purchased equipment with you guys, put that on there. You guys are also helping provide the curriculum. On Friday, we're all getting on a flight, a Husko's jet, and we're going to go down to Wichita. Deloitte has the factory of the future down there, which has these computer screens and automation. I guess they have like the robotic dogs and robotic stuff. I don't know what all to expect, but I think it's going to be supposed to be like a step into the future. And so we're going down there with the leaders of those schools. Your wife, right? Yeah, absolutely. Renee's and other business leaders, Johnson Controls, Komatsu, some of the smaller companies in town. And so, it's going to be great. Absolutely. And so we're going down this journey together of businesses and automation and in the high schools. And we got to do it because that's what the economy demands, and we want these folks to be part of their economy. Absolutely. And have you been to Wichita State to their innovation campus yet? No. I was down there I was in Wichita for a board meeting for a different organization in earlier this year, maybe March or April. And as it happened, we did a tour of Innovation Campus while we were as part of that board meeting, and it's stunning. It is amazing. Okay, yeah. Good. And I mean, what you're going to see, the smart factory, the things that Deloitte has done there, absolutely amazing. And then the way that they have set that campus, the university has set that campus up, partnerships between private employers and in their case, research. They're doing it's on the university campus? It's called the Innovation Campus. What they did, and I'm sure you'll learn all about this, was they took an old golf course and they turned it into this. It was a gentleman's vision. I forget his name. He's since passed, but he had this vision of taking this golf course that was lightly used and turning it into what they call their innovation campus. And so they've got all these buildings all over that campus, which are half like they showed us a Boeing a customer support center or something, right? Yeah. So they've got these engineers for Boeing that are working there. And then in the same building, the university is doing research on aeronautics.
And so they've got this over and over and over again. The Deloitte one is Deloitte Smart Factory on one side of it, and then the research going on the other side. So it's just this really, really cool partnership between private employers, and in this case, I believe they're an R1 research institution, but certainly a well-respected research institution with students and graduate students and so on, and professors and members of faculty doing really, really cool innovation. And so it's a cool model. So
great.
In as much as what you're going to see in the Deloitte Center is going to be really, really cool, keep your eyes open for some of the things that are going on.
Very cool.
So on the whole education front, you've got kind of an interesting education background. As I was doing my homework a little bit, and have a community college background, which is terrific. 4-year university, graduate school. Tell us a little bit about how Dale Kooyenga, from a educational standpoint, got to where you are today.
My parents worked very, very hard to send me to a private Christian high school, southwest suburbs of Chicago, called Chicago Christian High School, and I, wasn't a horrible high school student. I wasn't a bad high school student. I graduated with a 2.9 GPA.
Well, you beat me by 1 point.
Did I?
Yes, I was at 2.8.
We both turned out okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Absolutely. In fact, I'll tell you the quick story. At the end of my freshman year, I had a 1.8 of high school, 1.8 grade point average at the end of my freshman year. Had a friend of mine that said, look, your options are going to be pretty limited when we get to the end of our senior year. The rest of us will have all kinds of choices.
Oh, your friend said that to you?
My friend said that to me, and he's still one of my best friends. We just had this conversation a couple of weeks ago, and he was the 4.0 student, right? Yeah. And I was his best buddy that was the 1.8 student. He said, our goal for sophomore year, his goal was to get a 4.0. He said, your goal, meaning my goal, was to get a 3.0. And I did, and I just not because I had this like grand vision for where I ended up, but because it was a contest and I didn't want to lose.
Yeah, it's
and
funny.
That's
you
what
say
put
that.
me on that.
So I remember when, and that's why I'm a fan of this. I don't say it's shaming. I think you recognize people what they do, and actually has consequences for those that are not recognized. Because I clearly remember graduation day, and they had the gold tassels for those at 3.0 and above, and I had 2.9.
Yeah, so
here I was, but. I felt as if I was not as smart or educated or successful as those that were going to 4-year schools, right? But it was what I could afford.
Yep.
I didn't know where I was. I wanted to play basketball in college, and I thought maybe if I got really, really lucky, it's a whole different story that is not applicable to this. I could play college basketball. And so I was going to community college, but I remember looking at those with the gold tassels and being like, I could have done that. Yeah. I'm smarter than that person. Right. I could have done that. And then I was in a big construction accident that summer, and I was paying for my own school, and late bloomer, maturity wise, and also just the impact of going to a good high school.
Right.
And then going into a community college where the high schools that fed that were not as rigorous and as good as the high school that my parents sent me to.
Okay.
And all of a sudden getting A's.
Yeah, wow. At community college.
At the community college.
Awesome.
And all of a sudden, it's amazing how if you think yourself as smart, and people perceive you as smart, you start acting smart.
Right.
And I was always been a reader.
Yeah.
And so I just got in love with this knowledge. And it also helps when a very attractive girl leans over in science class and says, hey, how'd you get that? So there's all sorts of benefits I was seeing as far as going to community. So I went to community college. Then I got recruited to Lakeland, just north of here, for Sheboygan for basketball. Lakeland was perfect for me.
Yeah.
And then I graduated there, and then because there was no accounting graduates that year, because they changed the standards from 120 credits to 150.
Okay. Oh, so that was the year they did it.
I graduated early because I couldn't afford a whole other year of school. Okay. So I just loaded up my loaded up my classes, graduated December 30, 2000, 24 hours before that law went into effect.
Wow.
And then the big 5 firms at the time were looking at schools because they have a year no graduates.
Right.
So they went down to those schools that they typically didn't recruit from.
Huh.
So then I ended up at KPMG in Milwaukee.
Yeah.
Well, then what happened is I remember just knowing how prestigious that firm is.
It is.
And just thinking, oh my God, I don't belong here. Like an imposter syndrome. It's like, if I could just last 1 year, I could just have it on my resume for 1 year.
That's
right?
awesome. Just
and
stay under the radar.
You know what I found out is it doesn't matter where you go to college.
It doesn't.
Lakeland is a great school for me.
Yep.
And what matters is, are you willing to put the work in?
Right.
Right.
Absolutely.
Do you have the base downs? Are you willing to put the work in? And when you do the work, have a good attitude about it. Don't be a jerk about it.
Yep.
And so I had a good attitude. I put the work in, and I realized, 10 years later, they're like, hey, do you have vision? You want to talk about partner? I was like, partner? We're talking about partner?
Yeah. That's
and
awesome.
So, but then I also realized,
what I also realized
was when I was at KPMG is that I fell in love with Milwaukee. I knew I wanted to be part of this community. And I did recognize that there was a special, not exclusive, not a, this is a country club and you're a community college kid.
Right.
But there was a special bond with the Madison graduates.
Right.
And the Marquette graduates.
Here in Wisconsin, yeah.
And so I thought, well, I think I should get a Marquette degree. So I initially took the LSAT.
Okay.
Because I passed the CPA exam, and I thought, oh, geez, I could pass this LSAT.
Right.
And horrible.
Wasn't
horrible.
for you.
Oh, it was horrible. And so Marquette and KPMG said, not law school part-time, but why don't you do MBA?
Awesome.
So while I was doing public accounting, I did my MBA at Marquette.
Wow.
And I did that because I wanted Marquette on my resume so bad.
Huh.
Now, the MBA was also good. It was great. But I think to this day, I think my MBA is great. But the best education you could have is public accounting, especially in a city like Milwaukee, where you're in different industries and going around doing real estate and financial services and healthcare and education and all these different sectors, getting in there and learning them. That was the best education I received.
Absolutely. As much time as we spend on, STEM careers and technical education and engineering careers and advanced manufacturing, and relatively quickly, I found my way into advanced manufacturing. But as you suggest, I started in the finance and accounting world, and it's also just a phenomenal career pathway and choice for young people who are maybe a little bit more numbers driven, business driven. I mean, there's just no better way, if you want to have, in my opinion, to have a career in business than going that public accounting route and learning every single aspect.
And then the military came into my life,
right?
And the military has its own education,
so,
right? I mean, people don't think of basic training as education,
right?
But basic training is education. They're teaching you to do things.
Where are we in the timing, by the way? So
I joined the military halfway through KPMG. So I joined KPMG in 2001. 9/11 happened.
Yeah.
Joined the military. All our brothers said we joined together. The whole thing, it took me a couple of years, but I joined, signed the dotted line in 2004, shipped off for basic training in 2005. So it was halfway through my public accounting career.
So you're 4 years into a public accounting career.
Yeah.
And you decided to join the U.S. Army,
yeah.
is it? Yeah.
Yeah, my brother was in Iraq. My other brother said, hey, when I graduate college, I want to go Special Forces. And I thought, gosh, my brother's going to be around the dinner table telling war stories. I'm going to be telling stories about accounting. No, we also said when we were little boys, we said, if there's ever a big war, we're in this together. And so there was a big war. And so I just remember that promise. I met a girl who encouraged me to follow my dreams, to do that. That's not my wife. And so, so then it started that journey.
And first of all, thank you for your service. I never spent time with a veteran, or in this case, we'll talk about in a minute, your role as a lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Army Reserves, but never talked to anybody who served our country in that fashion without thanking them for my freedom. I've done that to you privately, but want to do that publicly here as we're chatting.
I enjoy it.
Yeah, well,
not every day, well, most days.
Right. Well, and I mean, just speaking of, as we did earlier, meaningful work, and just incredibly meaningful work. I mean, it absolutely is. So let's chat in a little bit more detail about that whole thing. So now you're involved in the Army Reserves as a lieutenant colonel. What's that all about?
Well, so I've done 2 different branches in the military. So as an officer, you have branches. And so I was military intelligence for a long time.
Okay.
But while I was doing military intelligence, I dabbled a lot in civil affairs, they call it as well.
Okay.
So when I was in Baghdad, I wasn't technically a civil affairs officer, but they saw my civilian background. And so essentially I worked with small businesses, big businesses, flew investors out to Baghdad to try to get the Baghdad economy up and running. It was very, very cool. And we did a lot of good things. Came back, did a lot more military intelligence. I commanded a counterintelligence company, did work for the Defense Intelligence Agency. And then my friend who was in civil affairs pulled me back into the civil affairs world. He's now a 2-star general.
Wow.
So civil affairs, what is civil affairs? Civil affairs is we try to minimize conflict so war doesn't happen. During war, we minimize the impact of war to help the civilian population to not create more enemies. And then post-conflict, we try to get a community back to a functioning community to once again minimize the impacts of conflict. And so it's a great place for a guy like me to be with a robust civilian career. And really, if you look at the wars we're fighting today, is the war that we're fighting, let's say with China, the conflict we're in with China, it's not going to be fought with artillery or tanks. It's going to be fought with businesses and ag policy and technology and that kind of stuff, information operations. And so when we're talking about what you guys do, like what you do as a national service,
thank you,
is what you do as far as inserting these skill sets into our graduates if that person joins the military, there's nothing in the military where they will not use technology. There's no such thing as an infantryman who's a grunt who just has a rifle who's totally divorced from any technology. It's all integrated. And then you have the people that are real technology, like the crypto people and the signal people.
Right.
That's high level. That's all part of the military. And if you're not part of the military, the reason our military is competitive is because people in our economy here are creating the technology to give us the edge, because we are not the most populous country in the world.
Right.
There's many countries more populous than us. India, China, Nigeria will be more populous than us. We're effective because we have the best technology and we have the largest GDP to tap for an economy that feeds the military, which gives us by far the largest military in the world with the most sophisticated technology. So whether you decide to serve in uniform or whether you decide to use technology and apply it to our workforce to make this economy strong and vibrant, either way, that's national service, and we need more of it.
And now again, maybe it's a rhetorical question or an obvious one, but did military service make you a better leader, a much better leader? And tell me how.
Absolutely.
Yeah, tell me how.
Well, I mean, this is a little bit campish, but I think it has legs to it, and it really impacts the way I think about it. Is there's this acronym you learn, leadership. It's not spelled correctly. It's LDRSHIP, and it's loyalty, duty, respect, integrity, and personal courage, right? And so when I look at what it takes to be a leader, just selfless service, it's that service mentality. It's about being deliberative and analytical, but not being a guy who analyzes but never make a decision. There's a balance there. And probably the biggest thing on leadership is there's no winning formula of what right looks like. And you can look at our history books of presidents or generals or business leaders. I think the minute you try to exactly replicate someone else's leadership, I think you're going to look silly.
Yep.
So I think the biggest thing in leadership is authenticity, is be who you are, but know that there's certain tried and tested rules of leadership that I just mentioned. I could guarantee you cannot be a leader that's effective and have the respect of people if you're unethical.
Right.
You can't be a leader in today's economy if you don't have a thirst for knowledge. You can't be a leader if you're the guy who's going to spend 3-4 hours on your phone on social media. You can't be a leader.
Right.
Because then you're just another person who regurgitates stupid crap that he sees in a world that's trying to manipulate things. You got to be a lover of knowledge and information and data. The person that takes data and makes it information and makes it knowledgeable and then makes it actionable. That's what you got to be. So there's so many different aspects that leadership has taught me in the military. And I love the back and forth I get to do as far as military leadership and business leadership and all those things that come together to give perspective.
So you mentioned already this love of knowledge. We talked earlier that you love to read. What do you love to read?
I'm all over the place. So I'll read the classics. I mean, right now it's painful. I'm not really enjoying it, but I gotta get through Charles Dickens' The Tale of Two Cities. I've tried several times to get through it. There's other classics I love to read. I mean, I love Steinbeck. I'm a big Steinbeck. East TV, I think, is like a great book. I read business books. Just read Brad Smith's book. Religion. I'm a Christian, so I like to read books on faith. History books, leadership books. All the Walter Isaacson books are great. I like the Shoe Dog book. Highly recommend that. So I'm a pretty wide reader. Reading short stories, H.G. Wells. I just think there's just so many things to explore. I just think there's so many areas that is just interesting and opens your mind. And I also think there's so many people that get in their stovepipes and all they could talk about is AI, or all they could talk about is politics. And I think it just comes to this like groupthink language of people just regurgitating the same crap over and over in their industry or the study, and they're just talking back and forth with these buzzwords. But if you're able to read widely and experience widely, what it does is creates a new leadership and a new conversation where you're able to pull that in, and that's very American, that's very healthy. And I think it creates new ideas and an effective leader.
I love that. And really, one of the things that I've always been fascinated by are people who can pull knowledge from a lot of different spaces and then make connections. And if you're just focused, to your point, of just on artificial intelligence, or just on business, or just on politics, your ability to kind of get those nuances and make connections between something you might read from Steinbeck and something else you might read from Brad Smith, and then say, well, here's a connection between these two things, really has an influence on leadership. I could sit here and do this for hours. I just got the sign from our producer that we're running a little tight on time. So one quick question about looking out at the next 5 years for the MMAC. What are some of those priorities, or some of the things that we may not have read about in the paper, or might not show up on your website, that are going to be really, really important to you?
Well, I think there's some economic development projects that we look very promising on. I think it's going to give great clarity of who we are and where we're at and where we're going. So that's really up there. Number two is, we're going to continue to lead on education and just public policy in general. We want to see our taxes be at a more reasonable amount in Wisconsin. They're too high. That would make us a lot more competitive. But more importantly, more than all that stuff, is education. We have amazing schools that ring around the city of Milwaukee. We have schools that are showing what success looks like within the city of Milwaukee. But Milwaukee Public Schools has a long way to go to be considered an effective and efficient system. But the schools that are performing, we are going to walk alongside them. We are going to lobby for more research for those schools, because the whole nation has a demographic problem. The Midwest more than the rest of the nation. The whole world is dealing with demographic issues. It's really shocking. But here in Milwaukee, we don't have the growth in our raw population. I think we're getting momentum to show who we are and get more people to stay and move. But we need more from our population center, the center of our region, which is Milwaukee. And we need to see better than a 65% graduation rate from Milwaukee Public Schools.
For sure.
And we got to see those choice and charter schools that are not performing at a level that we expect to also be held accountable.
For sure.
and change the move to put the pedal on the metal and see better results.
Absolutely.
So that's what we'll be doing. And, MMAC has been known as an organization that gets things done. There's a lot of organizations that talk.
Right.
There's a lot of talkers out there. There's not a lot of doers. MMAC has been a doer, and I can assure you it's going to stay that way.
As much as you talk about the importance of education here in the city of Milwaukee, and graduation rates and performance and accountability and so on, and a huge believer in all that, I'm also a huge believer that those of us that do have a huge soft spot in our heart for Southeast Wisconsin and the state and the Midwest have an obligation as well to stand up and to, when things are going well, support them. When people are doing innovative things that are good, face it, good for students, good for communities, to stand up and support that work. That's really important to us. I know it's really important to you. And one final thing that's important to me is to ask you the same question we ask every single one of our guests here on the Tech Ed podcast. And perfect segue as we're talking about K-12 education. I want to turn the clock back, Dale, to that 15-year-old Dale Kooyenga. You're in the state of Illinois. You're going to your Christian high school. You're working on your 2.9 grade point average, and all the great things that you probably didn't know were coming and were in your future, but certainly were. If you could go back and give that 15-year-old Dale one piece of advice, what would that be?
Well, first of all, I know 15-year-old Dale probably wouldn't listen to a 45-year-old suburban accountant, but if I had the chance, I would just simply say that develop plans, try to execute those plans, but keep them very, very flexible. And in particular, when you're 20s, that is the time to just put tools in the tool belt.
Yep.
And there's two ways that you could pursue your education. There are going to be kids in our community that are going to graduate and they're going to go to University of Wisconsin, study biology, and then they're going to go get a medical degree, become a doctor, and then become a pediatrician, and then they're going to become a pediatrician brain surgeon, and they're going to go all the way down, right? You just go down, and they're going to focus. And that's the way their mind works. That's the way they're doing it. It's great and it's perfect.
Sure.
I think there's a lot of us who are going to just kind of like have an accounting career, and then you're going to have a military career, and then you're going to have a political career, and then you're going to have these different experiences of people you know. And what you have is you have this giant Venn diagram, and then all of a sudden you wake up one day and you're the only one
That's awesome.
literally in the world who has this collection of experiences and collecting relationships to make you. And so I would say to 15-year-old Dale, have a plan, but be flexible, and just keep adding tools to that tool belt.
Absolutely. I love that advice of adding tools in the tool belt as you're in your teens, as you're in your 20s. And so many of us think that we've got our whole idea and our whole career mapped out as we're kind of leaving high school or whatever. And I think we're both examples of the fact that your career will take you in all kinds of crazy ways that
literally 36 months ago, I was like, what's the whole chamber association world? How does this work? And here you go, then you're leading one of the leading associations in the state.
Yep,
and so,
good Lord willing, you'll continue to do that for decades to come because you're doing great work. And really appreciate appreciate Dale Kooyenga joining us on this episode of the Tech Ed Podcast. Just a great conversation. I think in many ways, an example for the rest of the world of how we can focus on economic development and education and really that good moral fiber and an incredible work ethic here in the Midwest. And Dale is certainly an example of that. So I want to thank our audience for joining us on this episode. We referenced all kinds of great resources that we'll be sure to link up in the show notes for this episode. So be sure to check those out. We'll put those at techedpodcast/Dale. That's techedpodcast.com/Dale, so nobody has to figure out how to spell Kooyenga. And we'll leave it at that. Also, check us out on social. As our audience knows, we are all over social media. We are all over Instagram, Facebook. We are on LinkedIn. We are on TikTok. Please connect with us. Please share your thoughts. We would love to hear from you, and we'd love to see you next week on the next episode of the Tech Ed Podcast. Until then, I am your host, Matt Kirkner. Thank you for being with us.